herzlich willkommen.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back.
Dass ihr da seid. Schön, dass ihr zu Hause mit
It's
dabei
great to
seid.
have you here. It's great to have you all watching on screen.
Priming, ja? Ihr kommt hier rein.
This is priming.
Die Bühne, Licht geht an, die
Enter the
Moderation kommt hoch und
stage,
zack,
the
ihr
light
setzt euch eure
goes
Kopfhörer
on,
auf. So ist der
and
Pavlovsche Effekt, ne?
you
Frau
put
kommt
on
hoch,
your headphones.
Kopfhörer auf. So
So
funktioniert das.
a woman
Genau. Also alle
enters
mal,
the
die jetzt zum ersten Mal
stage,
hier
you
drin
put
sind,
on your
bitte
headphones.
direkt den
That's great.
Kopfhörer
That's
aufsetzen. Das
priming.
geht gleich wieder
So
über
for
Kopfhörer
everyone who is here
los.
for the first
Für euch
time,
zu
please put
Hause,
on your
keine Sorge,
headphones.
bleibt genau alles, wie es ist. Ihr müsst
And
nichts
for all
machen.
you people
Hier
at
drin,
home,
wer
you
zum
don't
ersten Mal
have to
da
do
sitzt, bitte
anything.
auf Blau gehen,
If you're
weil
here on the
sonst
stage for the
Programm von da
first
drüben,
time,
Gesichter von
please
hier, das
put your
passt nicht so
headphones
gut zusammen.
to
Also,
blue.
wir
Switch
schalten
them
gleich mal
on
um,
blue
einmal aufsetzen und dann
to
geht's
get
los.
the sound from the stage.
Ja, es gibt ein Wort, das gerade
There is
relativ
one word
ungewollt berühmt geworden
that
ist, und das
has
ist die
become very fashionable unintentionally, and that is the supply chain.
Zeitungen sehen es in den
There are many
Nachrichten.
issues
Ich habe mich gefragt, bei
going
der
on
Recherche,
currently,
was
and
war
I
denn
was wondering
eigentlich
during
so
my
die
research,
allererste globale
what was
Lieferkette
actually
der
the
Welt? Deswegen mal
first
gucken, wie schlau ihr
global
hier seid.
supply
Wer
chain?
weiß denn, was die
Who
erste
knows
globale Lieferkette der Welt war?
About the first
Okay, wir
global
machen's
supply
einfacher. Wir
chain?
machen drei
What was
Varianten.
it?
Ich gebe euch drei Beispiele.
Well,
Ihr macht mit
let's
Handzeichen,
do
wofür
it a
ihr
little bit easier. I give you
Es
three
gibt A,
options.
die
First,
erste Lieferkette
A.
der Welt war bei der Pyramide. B, beim
It
Schießpulver
happened
oder
during the
C,
pyramid.
bei Rum. Wer glaubt,
It
dass es die
happened
Pyramide war? Einmal
for
Hand
rum or for
Jawohl. So, einmal
Gunpowder.
Schießpulver.
gunpowder?
Weniger. Und einmal Rum. Wer glaubt, die
Rum?
erste globale Lieferkette
The
war
first
bei
global
Rum?
supply
Das sind
chain
auch
being
ich
for
dachte,
rum?
Das erste war das häufigste.
I think
Wer hat
most
das
people
schwierig
voted
verstanden?
for the first option.
Ja,
Who
gut,
didn't
okay.
understand the
Es
game?
meldet sich einer ehrlich, das finde ich schön.
Actually, there
Okay,
is
tatsächlich
one who
war die erste
raised it
globale
then. So the first
Lieferkette
global
bei
supply
Rum.
chain
Und zwar war das im 18.
was
Jahrhundert.
established for
Die
rum in
Lieferkette
the
begann
18th
damals mit
century.
Sklaven von Afrika, die
The
in
supply
Karibik
chain
geschifft wurden.
was
Kamen dort aus
done
dem
with
Gebiet,
slaves
entstanden
who
Bürgerorden,
were
die
shipped
dort
from
abbauen.
Africa to
Und
the
am Ende wurde
Caribbean,
das Ganze dann in den USA
and
destilliert.
finally
Ja,
they
das,
distilled
war die erste
everything in
globale
the US.
Lieferkette.
So
Gott
that
sei
was
Dank
the
ist
first
heute
global
das Thema
supply
Sklaven
chain.
nicht mehr so, beziehungsweise wir haben große
Fortunately,
Bemühungen,
we
dass es
no
faire
longer
Arbeitsbedingungen
have
sind. Aber es hat
slaves
sich auch
or
sonst viel
slavery
verändert. In der
structures.
Lieferkette viel wurde digitalisiert.
But also many other
Jetzt geht
things
es
have
darum, die
changed.
richtigen Dinge zum
The
richtigen
supply
Zeitpunkt
chain
irgendwo zu haben,
has
sondern
been
auch
globalized,
das Business damit
and it's
zu
about getting
managen,
the things
zu erhöhen.
to the right
Ganz
place
viele
at the
Themen.
right time,
Und ich
and
freue
it's
mich
also about
wahnsinnig,
increasing
dass wir darüber
sustainability.
sprechen können. Und ich freue mich
And
sehr
I'm
auf
glad
meine Gäste,
to
die hier
have
auf der
my
Bühne
guests
auf dem Screen
with me. I would like to ask them to come on stage.
Der Jörg gerade, wie bei der Formel 1, einen Undercut gemacht. Einmal links
That
vorbei.
was like Formula One.
So, ich stelle euch mal gerne alle
So I would like
vor, die
to
beiden
present
mit dabei
you
sind.
the
Unser
panelists.
sportlicher
Our
Mitstreiter hier, das ist Professor Dr. Jörg Elsenbach, Global
Professor
Head of
Dr.
Transformation
Jörg
bei Dresden.
Elsenbach.
Schön, dass du da bist.
It's good to have you.
Und gleich das Wasserglas, ja, ist anstrengend hier hoch. Dann freue ich mich sehr, dass er sich die Zeit
And
genommen
then
hat,
I'm very glad to
Und,
have
heute bei
him
uns
on
digital
screen
mit dabei
to
ist
join
Dr.
us,
Sven
Dr. Sven
Lorenz,
Lorenz, Head of Group Digital Program and Data Governance at Volkswagen AG.
Hallo zusammen.
Hello everybody.
Und wir haben Michael Appel dabei.
Michael
Partner Industrial
Appel.
Cloud Solutions bei MHP. Da ist der Fanclub am Start.
Partner for Cloud Solutions at MHP.
Moin.
Ich bin neidisch. Also Sven,
I'm jealous.
macht euch nichts draus, Sven und Jörg.
Sven,
bei mir ist es auch nicht so. Also hier aber
Well,
die
I'm not like that either,
Ich hab
but the
eine
group
Frage an euch
is here.
alle. Wir haben es ja gerade gehabt,
I've got a question for you all.
digitale Transformation
Digital
und so weiter,
transformation, the supply chain,
Riesenthema.
big
Supply Chain
topics.
Issues heißt das so schön
Supply
auf
chain
Englisch.
issues
Frage an
is what
euch.
it's called.
Was schätzt
So
ihr,
my
wie oft
question to
wird
you,
Supply Chain Issues
what do you
im
think?
Monat
How
weltweit
often
gegoogelt? Einfach mal
is
sagen,
the term
was ihr glaubt.
supply chain
Michael,
issues
du musst
googled
anfangen.
per month?
Was glaubst du, wie
What do you
viel,
think,
wird
Michael?
das gesucht?
How
Wie
often do people
dieses Thema?
search supply chain issues? 256,000?
Mal. Das ist eine hohe Zahl.
That is a high figure. Jörg, what will you say?
Ich würde sogar eine Zehnerpotenz
I'd say
Wow.
to the power of
So viele
10.
Menschen googeln nach Supply Chain Issues.
Wow.
Sven, du kannst es nach unten drücken oder nach oben noch.
Sven, what do you think?
Ja, ich lege mich in die Mitte, aber
I think
Das ist auf jeden Fall
I choose the middle. I think it's a 7-digit number. I thought so as well, because, for example, toilet paper, when it went scarce at the time, in March 2020, it was Googled 1.5 million times. And now, on average, it's 350,000 times per month. This is quite impressive. So only 49,500 search requests at Google, which I find a lot. But last month there was an increase of 819%. So this large figure emerged only in recent months, so it's become a big issue. And if you would like to join our debate, I'm happy to use this beautiful cube. If you, people in the back rows, have a question or would like to make a statement, don't be shy. I'm going to semi-professionally throw that cube out there to you, to the back rows, and then you can keep it or you can pass it on supply chain like. So let's get started. So I've been researching supply chain issues, and I listened to a podcast with SAP boss Christian Klein, and there is not a single meeting with a CEO that is not about supply chains. So Sven, Jörg, what is it that's being discussed on the CEO level? What are the core topics? Well, it started with a clogged Suez Channel during the pandemic. At the time, we thought these are isolated events that lead to disruptions in the supply chains. Now we've been realizing that the political situation is completely different. Supply chains are disrupted for many reasons, and they have an impact on all industries worldwide. So it's about resilience. How can we guarantee our supply chains so that we can keep up production? And that is a daily effort. In addition to the daily effort, we have to procure the materials and the parts. And in addition to that, we have to think about the future. We have to diversify our position to be more resilient in the global supply chain situation. You've been referring to the future. I think we should really act already today. How can you restructure yourself today to become more resilient? Jörg, what's going on in your company? So basically, we start with the purchase potential analysis. So the material groups are being analyzed. And the single sourcing trend is now turned around. So, in how far can we change that single sourcing trend? And how far can we recruit several suppliers? And another aspect is to relocalize suppliers, to decrease supply chains, to make them shorter and more controllable. Good point. Michael, as a consultant, you get to hear from different industries. What are the biggest concerns of your customers today? Well, that's a risk evaluation. Global supply chains provide big opportunities. We've been specializing in getting the right parts at the right time to the right place. And this process is now being disrupted by many reasons: crises, strikes, ships, not enough ships. And now we must think about minimizing the risks and still using the potential of global supply chains. It's about striking a balance. Jörg, I've just researched how many percent are already based on global supply chains, how much of the industry, and it's 80%. In the beginning, the basis was a low-cost thought, and this thought is now costing us a lot. because we are no longer sovereign. What is the cost of this relocalization process, and what is the scope that we are talking about? How does it work? Well, I think you need to be aware of the fact that you start with a couple of critical products and then start the localization process together with the suppliers, because we've lost the ability to do that, and it will take time to build up these capabilities again. So talking about time frames, I think it's 3 to 5 years till we can feel an improvement of the situation of these critical materials.
Wir haben jetzt gerade auch gesehen,
so, another big issue, the Ukraine war, stifling supply chains, the cable trees. Jan, Jörg, you are skeptical. I'll call it the cable trees. You also felt the impact, Sven. So you had to make certain transitions. What was your experience? Is that really an option, and is it a smart option to focus on regions and Europe, or do you think it's wrong to make that shift? I think there is no simple response to that. So I must say chapeau to the Ukrainian people and the suppliers who managed to keep up production and to deliver. And still we tried to find alternative supply paths, alternative locations with the suppliers. I think the concept that is being used also in politics will prevail. It's no longer onshoring or offshoring, but friendshoring. So the supply chains are maintained with partners that are reliable in the long term. And I think that will be one aspect of future supply chains. Ukraine is a friendly country that has been attacked, but the question of the geopolitical situation can be extrapolated, and I think this will be a basis for future supply chains. Being pragmatic, if we did that, it's a valid point to make sure where you can get safe or secure supply chains. And most interestingly, the IFO has implemented a research saying that if we no longer produced globally, but rather regionally on our continent, the volumes would be reduced by 10%. Would you say, yes, I do it anyway? Or do you say, well, no, the economic damage is too bad? I think here you'd have to discuss two things separately. First, would someone in Germany want to produce a board net or a cable tree in 3 shifts? And the answer clearly is no. In Germany, nobody nowadays wants to produce products like that in a 3-shift system. So the product would have to be digitized, automated, so that it can be produced in a different way. The second point is we also have plants in Africa, and there was the Arab Spring there. So these suppliers are now in a more stable situation, but we know that in countries like that, economic crises emerge, that there might be unrest again with an effect on the supply chains. And the same applies to Algeria, Libya, the whole of Northern Africa. We are in the midst of the discussion, and I would like to call upon you to state your questions or comments. Just raise your hands. We've had one question before, and it was great fun. Actually, it's great fun to me because I get to throw that cube. So, as you've noticed, one panelist went missing. So I'm going to move a bit closer. So, if you have a question, please raise your hand, then I'll throw that cube. So, what are the strategies that we might still pursue? What would be the right strategy? Maybe there are customers, partners here in the audience. What strategy would you suggest? Well, there are also countries that are offering to fill these gaps that have been produced by China or Russia. Portugal, for example, the partner country of the Hanover Trade Fair, very actively positioned itself, stating we can do this, we can produce at good cost, at good quality. We've got short ways in Europe, and we need to analyze and validate that suggestion, whether we cannot use these supply chains in Europe as well. Sustainability is also a part of it. You've already mentioned it, the bullwhip effect. The effect that if you start to gather things in the front of the supply chain because of the war, then there will be a snowball effect throughout the supply chain. Now, Jörg, if your main purchaser is sitting there telling you that there is a problem because there is no more product, and you say, well, why is there no more product? I like to refer to the toilet paper problem, because there was enough toilet paper, but there was this circumstance that produced the bottleneck. What do you observe? So part of our procurement volume is defined by the OEM. And this is a phenomenon that surprises me every day. The OEM itself makes sure that our suppliers provide us with the material. That might sound strange, but that's the principle. The OEM foresees the bullwhip effect and sends you truckloads full of product, and you have to use this product, and you cannot intervene in that process. The second point is replacing material often only succeeds on the second attempt. Last year we had a crisis due to the flooding that caused supply chain disruptions as well. And we've also noticed how long it took us to substitute certain things. I think at very short notice, on a daily basis, we need to control the supply chain. It's not a management, it's a more kind of a control. While controlling bottlenecks, you can only respond to the situation. I've mentioned it before, when I had to tidy up my room as a child, I just grabbed everything from the floor and put it into the cabin, into the wardrobe. Well, you need to see where we are coming from. The global supply chains and the very hierarchical supply chains were based on bilateral agreements between the supplier and the OEM and Tier 1 and Tier 2, with very little transparency across the supply chain. We didn't know which semiconductor was used in a car and which one in a radio, and we didn't know the effects of supply chain bottlenecks throughout the supply chain. Now we work based on cooperation, for example, in personnel management, capacity management. to really avoid these bullwhip effects. Catena-X is trying to build up a platform like that, a network like that, and works with use cases like bottleneck management. So it's about analyzing the supply chain bit by bit and make it transparent so as to detect possible bottlenecks at a very early stage. And that is an innovative approach. In the past, it was dominated by OEMs, and now everybody understands that these approaches based on cooperation can achieve a lot more. So if we move away from bottlenecks, this is one thing. You've been referring to Catena-X, but if we get to that, I would like to take a look at one step ahead. Digitization is also something that can be controlled. It's a control element in the supply chain. I've done my homework. I love facts and figures. So IDC implemented a study with industrial companies, and only 29% of interviewees said, yes, we offer IIoT projects. So it's about Catena-X and about other things. Is the technology readiness already given? Do we have everything that we need to really set up that cooperation? Or is it the case that we have to do our homework first? We are not ready yet. We are not capable of that cooperation yet. Well, I am annoyed that digitization is put in the hands of CIOs. Technological questions are solved. Technological issues have been solved. And the CEO and the CTO must push that development, because digitization is about the orchestration of different aspects, roles, devices, etc. And if you reduce that to a technical issue, it's not comprehensive enough. So, a clear statement. The colleague has already said it. We don't need an innovation here. What we need is a governance that fosters that topic within the companies. And I don't think that the CIO is the right person to do that. Why? Because we've had several CIOs on stage. Why don't you think the CIO is the right person? Well, the CIO is a technical person, and digitization per se is used to make business models more sustainable or to develop new business models. And in my opinion, that's a business topic and not a technical topic. It must go beyond the CIO.
Herr Dies hat sich ja da eingesetzt. Wollte ich gerade sagen, Sven, wie sieht es denn bei euch aus? Also der Herr
Well, Mr. Dies said we have to transform ourselves into a software company, but what's your opinion, Sven? Well, I think this is a different kind of question. There are digitalization areas where we still have a need to kind of catch up technologically. But in the digitalization of supply chain, we don't have a technological problem, but nevertheless, we still need the CIO organization and IT. But these are more legal questions. These are organizational questions, sometimes also mindset questions. Am I willing to take my internal data and to share them with my partners to solve a problem together? So it's not about creating more kind of power relations and to spy on company secrets of others. This is not the issue. It's a digitalization of the supply chain. So this is an interesting topic, organizationally speaking, how we tackle these challenges together, like, for instance, the new Supply Chain Act that we have to implement. But technically speaking, this is not so much of an issue. Well, we keep on talking about that because Catena-X is the perfect example to talk about that. I throw this to you, yeah, almost.
Los geht's. Los geht's.
Start, please. Yes, actually, it matches very well because it has already been mentioned. From my point of view, we in Germany, we are not so fast, and legal questions might be drivers. And now my favorite hangman word comes. What do you think? What kind of challenges and opportunities brings the new supply chain law, and how do you handle that? No one dares to answer. Maybe you can take a seat here and ask the questions. I think this brings a lot of opportunities for all of us. The big challenge for us is Catena-X is one option to show a solution to this. The challenge is that in the big companies, for the automotive manufacturers, for instance, technologically and organizationally, we are very well positioned to provide the data and to have an end-to-end transparency. But the important players are actually the small and medium-sized companies. Also at the beginning of the supply chain, they work with EDI, where they order with paper and fax. And I think the hurdle is bigger here for these companies to say, well, I build everything so that I have a complete data chain from the beginning to the end. In the past weeks, I intensely focused on this new Supply Chain Act. I also did that with my colleague from compliance, from purchasing, from logistics. And the opportunities are defined by the regulation of this new Supply Chain Act. There are individual regulations today in individual countries that try or that take this transparency in the supply chain as a basis. And of course, we now need to know our supply chains very well. We need to know who delivers what kind of components, where are these components produced, under which conditions. And this helps us for all other supply chain related questions as well. It is a high claim. It will not be easy to provide that on a broad basis. What we need for that is that everybody participates. And to give you a rough number here, we speak about 100,000 of players in the automotive supply chain alone. And to be able to cover all of that completely, they all have to work together in order to ensure transparency. But it is a big opportunity so that we can also solve with that, once we have the transparency, other supply chain problems. We as an organization, we participate in this working group with the Ministry of Labor. So a lot of questions in the Supply Chain Act are still unclear. For instance, how the whole complaint process works. We think it is a main part of the corporate social responsibility, also in the sustainability area. But from my point of view, it is a coupling product from the digitalization of the supply chains. And with other comparable questions like the digital product pass, we do not need to reinvent the wheel. Via the digitalization of the supply chain, maybe I can also cover additional requirements like the new Supply Chain Act on the digital product pass. And this is exactly what's so complicated. So we've already heard that we need to use what we have and not run from one innovation to another one. I hope that this answers your question. And someone else here, because I stand here, someone else who wants to ask a question or give a comment. So if you throw it properly, then I can also reach the last row. No? So maybe I can just throw in and let's see who catches it.
Kommen wir doch mal zu Catena-X, weil das ist ja etwas, was hier immer.
So let's come back to Catena-X, because this plops up again and again. I looked for the definition. Catena-X should bring the automotive industry of the future into an active system of circular economy where all participants are networked and have the same rights. So, I mean, how on earth would you like to achieve that? I mean, individual companies cannot even define where the products come from, what they need for what wears, what produce. So how should it work now here? Well, you've said correctly, to be able to be part of the process, you need to have a kind of maturity. Some participants, in my opinion, are not mature enough, but it's just my opinion. I think you have to have a certain maturity to be part of the process, but you also need to be kind of humble enough to participate here. So we have created some working groups, and the working groups come up with a suggestion and the governance on how to structure data models, so that at the end of the day, they satisfy a majority of demands. And you have to kind of be humble enough to accept that you cannot fulfill all your demands. You cannot say, this is my data model, and you all have to accept my data model. This is not the way how it works. So this is why we take a look at concrete cases and take a look at what kind of data can be ported. How do we want to interoperate between the companies? And as Sven has said, we need this collaborative approach. And of course, we are also competitors on the market. But what I can tell you is we are kind of also neutral people in the working group, and we are also pragmatic, not like politicians.
Job, der Cloud.
Well,
Und ich frage mich gerade, das erste, was
Michael, you have a great job. It's about the cloud and the digitalization of structures and implementation. I've heard a term that is great for Scrabble: interface problems. Well, this doesn't work, that doesn't work. We have an interface problem. So now I imagine there are different companies, suppliers, different types of data that need to be combined. I do not really understand how that should work. On the pragmatic technical level, how can that work, Catena-X? It can only work by using modern cloud technology, by having a clever cloud concept. That is what Catena-X is striving for. And with that, you can tackle these challenges. And the challenges are, Sven has just mentioned it, he talked about 10,000 possible Catena-X partners. And for 70%, we do not have the maturity for handling the interfaces or using the cloud and be part of the data chain. And this is also our task as consultants, to help these companies with low effort to find a way to become part of this chain, because that's the only way how it works at the end of the day. And we sent a new video of Robert Habeck that was posted in Catena-X, and he also talked about the wiring harness, by the way. If Mr. Habeck talks about wiring harnesses, I'm also allowed. And he said there are more than 5,000 components in there, and the complexity comes with the materials and the raw materials that are involved, and we need an overview of that. Sven, at Volkswagen, you have two priorities. You do not only want to have an overview what is available where, but by 2030 you said you have to achieve the first climate targets, and then 2050 the last ones. So what do? Is the German variant here? You have a form and you fill it in, or do you use blockchain, or how do you use it at Volkswagen? What do you do with Catena-X so that it is sustainable? Well, actually, we proceed by use cases, and we talk to the individual areas, which of their challenges can be solved by the Catena-X approach across supply chains. And we've heard the examples today. We talked about the Supply Chain Act, we talked about transparency, CO2 footprint, the carbon product footprint. We talk about a joint quality management throughout the supply chains. So these are very precise and tangible challenges that somehow can be solved if you only solve that or talk to your direct supplier. But you can be better if you talk to more stakeholders. And of course, we need more data in the data system of Catena-X in order to come up with better services and solutions. But this is a gradual process. We go on step by step. I don't know if you know how Catena-X is set up. There is an association focusing on the standards, but then we have a project for 3 years with 10 use cases. We also participate in some of them, and concrete solutions are developed there. This is the plan. Maybe can you give us details of one use case? So just give us an example. One prerequisite also for the Supply Chain Act is that the partners of the supply chain need to be identified first of all. We call it business partner data management. This is required in order to be able to write invoices and get paid at the end of the day. But it's more than that. So who fulfills what kind of criteria? So this business partner master data management is one of these projects. And since we all need that in the network, and once all partners have been registered, then you can solve a lot of these challenges. For instance, how can I contact what supplier? And the second thing is the parts traceability of, the parts, which parts are installed in which components, which raw materials are used for which parts. We need that for the circular economy, to recycle everything. You need that for the CO2 footprint calculation, to gradually calculate the carbon footprint of an assembled product. So these are the services that will be offered first, and then based on that we develop more and more applications in an open system. So it won't be developed by one Catena-X company. There will be different providers that develop things in this ecosystem. Thank you very much for the examples, because this is easier to understand what you do in here. As a last question, Catena-X had a kind of a connection to Gaia-X. It's kind of the next level. Gaia-X was presented in 2019, and I thought, well, that's great, open cloud, joint project. We are one nation. If we cannot do that together, how should we kind of win against the big players? And then all of a sudden, you haven't heard much since then about Gaia-X. So how do we avoid to be as slow also with Catena-X as we were with Gaia-X? That's a great question. Well, you pay me for that. Well, Gaia-X was more theoretical, but Catena-X is based on that. It is the first practical implementation of the Gaia-X idea with the focus on automotive. And the target is to establish certain standards, also in the technology, so that you do not depend so much on the American hyperscalers or on foreign technology standards. So it was a decision that was taken consciously that we focus on Europe here. And this is a good initiative that goes into the right direction. Nevertheless, also for Catena-X, we talk to American companies, and that's very important. Sven has said so at the beginning. It's not only about technology, it's also about mindset and experience and speed. And of course, we still need the big American hyperscalers. At the beginning, thank you very much for your opinion, and the hyperscalers will play a role in our next panel, the last panel here. This will play a big role here for the metaverse. So here it's also about who has the biggest cake, but this is very important that everything is orchestrated well. At the end, one final round, an outlook, so to say. I've asked myself, or I asked at the beginning, how often supply chain issues are Googled. Now, let's take a look into 2025. What do you think? What will be the most frequently searched term in 2025 with regard to the supply chain? Well, anyway, my guess was completely wrong with regard to supply chain issues. It's difficult now to guess. But I can imagine that in 2025 we will talk a lot about flexibilization of the supply chain. Maybe it's not that term, but managing something as a service, who can deliver what, also at short notice. How can I make my supply chain more flexible? I can imagine that this is one of the topics that will be relevant in 2025. I can absolutely agree. I remember like 15 years ago, we had a research project that was called Supra-Adaptive Logistic Chains. And this is exactly what we need. We need to be able to punctually connect to individual supply chains and guarantee interoperability like that. This will be the difficult thing. That you do not only stabilize supply chains with that and digitalize supply chains, but that you are also able to very quickly, maybe in an unusual way, to connect to other supply chains. So to find workarounds, this is something that you need to get used to. I think when you find workarounds, you can also find good solutions. So maybe we Google that then in 2025 So your last statement. Yes, I mean, the supply chain of the PlayStation 5 was interrupted, and I think the PlayStation 6 will come soon, and for years it will be the availability of the PlayStation 6 maybe in 2025. Well, we say when everything is digital, it's not emotional, but maybe at the very end, Sven, if I am right, it's your birthday today. Oh, the news reached you, yes. So I have a microphone here in my hand, so please sing with me.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, lieber Sven. Happy birthday to you.
Vielen Dank.
Thank you very much. Thank you. That's a nice surprise.
In diesem Sinne, vielen, vielen herzlichen Dank, dass
So, thank you very much for joining the panel, for singing, for asking questions. Thank you, Sven, that you're here on your birthday. So we come back here at 4:05 with the keynote Leading the Sustainable Transition. And here's your QR code. Don't forget that.